Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE EJB JPA tutorial. Now you are watching part 9 of the subseries JPA entity relation, one-to-many and many-to-one. So here we are going to modify our bean layer to add further functionality. So these are all the review of what we created previously. You can look at this sequence number and how we generated our code and proceeding with this subseries. So in the previous video, we completed adding a new job. Now we will proceed with the bean layer implementation for the new set of functionality. Here we are adding a function employee find by ID. So here we are adding new function emp find by ID and we provide employee ID here. Next, job find by ID. Once a ID is given, the bean layer should retrieve the job entity. So these two functions, retrieving the employee by entity, retrieving the employee entity by employee ID and job ID, and there is a third function edit employee. For this edit employee, we use these subsequent functions find by ID and find by ID. The first one is find by ID of employee, the second one is find by ID of job. Here we specify employee ID, name, middle name, last name, job level and job ID. So the goal here is in user point of view, they will make use of this function and retrieve a employee, and then they modify the employee, and modify information will get fed into these parameters, and this edit employee will modify the employee records. So this involves the linkage also. That means if an employee previously performed an editor role, as part of the editing, they can even change the role from editor to a senior editor, say for example. Right, now we will go to bean implementation, and if you see emp find by ID, we are receiving employee ID as a input parameter. Here we are making call to entity manager.find, then we are passing whatever is received. So this will return an entity because it is entity manager.find, right? And type what we are specifying is employee class, so it will return an employee entity. We know that the ID is unique, so it will return only one employee. Similarly, find by job ID, we are passing the job ID. Similarly, find by job ID, we are passing the job ID to our bean method. Then in the implementation, we are once again using entity manager.find, job.class and job ID. This will return entity job. Next, we implement edit employee functionality. And the edit employee, if you see first name, middle name, last name, job level, job ID, emp find by id. So this is the function we are using, emp find by id, and this will give us the employee. Then we are doing a setter method for this employee. So informations are already coming here as a parameter. So first name we are setting it, middle name, last name, job level, then job id. For job id, if you see, we are making call to set job id, and remember in our employee single entity, right? Employee single entity, we have a containment for job. One employee entity will have one pointer for job. That means points to single entity, one job entity, right? So likewise, there may be many employee. They all can point to a same job ID. That way, ending up with many to one. So this we already saw many times in our previous videos, so we don't need to reiterate here. Emp.set job, and if you see, we are using the second method, job find by id. So this will return job entity. So that entity we are giving it to set job of our employee, so thereby making the relation, or at runtime the containment will get fulfilled by this call emp.set job. Finally, we perform emp.persist, and here we are passing the employee. What happens now, this new information will get persisted into the database. Now it's demo time. We will go ahead and implement our bean layer. Okay, now we will go to bean layer. So these are all the new functionality. Find employee by ID, find job by its ID, then finally edit the employee. Now we'll go to bean layer. Here we will place our new code. Here we are finding the employee by ID, and you can see entity manager dot find. That's the instance, entity manager dot find. Class type is employee, and we are giving an ID. So ultimately it will find a unique record in the database and populates the employee entity and returns that employee entity. The same stuff we are returning from here as well. Same goes for find by job ID. So next we will implement our next round of functionality. Here edit employee, we receive all the fields, string employee ID, first name, middle name, last name, then job IDs. So the code were already explained in the PowerPoint slide. For a quick preview, if you see, first we are finding the ID. Why? Because employee ID is coming here as parameter. Then after we found the employee entity, we are populating the content. Set first name, middle name, last name, job level, and set job, all those stuff. Here, if you see, it's a find. This function emp find by ID is making use of entity manager.find. So whatever employee we get here is in a managed state. So we are modifying its field. That means here emp will have before this step, emp will have a populated information, but here we are changing that information and finally making call to persist. So this will apply the modification in the database. That's all here in this video. Thank you for watching. Bye.